Greetings, everyone. Good afternoon, and maybe good evening or even good morning, based on where you are at the moment. Thank you for joining us, and welcome all to the third episode of this year, 2023, of the MCAA Around the World webinar series. As you may already know or may not, the series takes place on the second Friday of each month, and we would like to invite you all, of course, to stay tuned and join the coming episode organized by MCAA chapters and groups. In this, so as for today, the webinar is about storytelling in science with the help of the MCAA Communication Working Group, especially Robin Rioza. The webinar is organized by the MCAA Middle East chapter. The board members, Amani Awamle, the chair of the chapter, she is here with us, Murad Shoman, Elias Zadu, and myself, Lamia Abdullah. Amani, you may say a couple of words if you may. Amani, can you hear us?
Yes, hello, Lamia. Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Right, please.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Lamia, for your welcoming speech, and thanks to all for participation in this sessions, and a special thanks to the speakers for their time and efforts devoted for this interactive sessions. I hope everything will be fine, and we will have fruitful discussions at the end of this sessions. Thank you, Lamia.
Thanks, Amani. Great. So today we are glad to have two distinguished speakers. First, we will hear from Martins Zaumanis. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Martins. He is keen to unravel scientists' hidden potential for communicating their research. He has a book series, peer recognized, in which he holds actionable advice on writing impact research papers, delivering powerful academic presentation, attracting research funding, and creating scientific visualization. He writes a blog, it's called Peer Recognized, where he shares tools and helps scientists to communicate more efficiently. I strongly advise you to have a look into the blog. We shared some particular links of that blog in the registration form, so you may have a look afterwards. In his day job, Martins is a researcher at EMPA in Switzerland. His research is focusing on sustainability to road pavements through recycling and the use of waste materials in asphalt production. He's closely collaborating with road construction companies and road administrations to expedite the adaptation of practical techniques. He will tell us more about himself in a bit, and then and we will hear from him about how to nail the scientific talk in the first session of this webinar. The second session of this webinar, we will hear from Chaira Segré. She might not be with us yet, but she will join later. She is a biologist and research doctor in molecular oncology with a master's degree in science journalism and communication. She worked 8 years in cancer research and science, and since 2010, she has been involved in scientific dissemination. She's currently the head of scientific supervision at Umberto Veronesi Foundation, as well as that she's writing books for children and teenagers. Such an example of a book on 2021, the book called Secrets of the Centenarians, for the foundation itself, together with Agnese Collino. And she will tell us more about herself as well in the session. I just want to welcome you all again, and we will open the space for Q&A during the session. Some of our speakers would like to have interactive, so we will happily receive your comments and answers, questions, and any points you would like to share with us via the chat. We will keep following the chat. One more thing before we start, the first part of the webinar will not be recorded, but then the second part will be. And now we can just start with you, Martins. If you're ready, the floor is yours.
Share my screen. Ok. Oops, sorry. Schermo intero, eccolo qua. Condividi. You can see my presentation, right?
Yes, we can see it in the show mode. Great.
Let's start.
Yes.
So my talk will be about storytelling and science communications, but on a completely different and specular point of view. So we would talk about the importance of being able as a scientist to talk to different type of publics, so not people that are scientists, and in how storytelling in particular can help us in this very difficult and complicated thing, because don't you think that just because you know something, because you are a scientist and you work and you know a lot of that of your subject, then you are also able to communicate it effectively to people that are not scientists. So why it's so important? Because I don't know if you have ever realized it, but we are in the middle of the so-called age of knowledge. Sociologists call out the period that we are living in now, starting from the end of the Second World War in the past centuries, because everything that we do, our entire societies are based on knowledge and the product of science and technology. Around 30% of global economy derives from industries with a high degree of knowledge and technology. And as I told you before, all the goods and services that we are being exchanged in our common life, in every areas of our societies, is determined by knowledge content. So the price of a smartphone, for example, is not is only in a small part due to the materials, but for it is due by the level of knowledge and science that there is behind this object. And this is true for every, if you think about it, for every areas of our life. Every year the world, this is the general value of the world. Of course, there are unfortunately very differences between different countries, but the world invests over 2% of the GDP in the research and development. It's a value that is 3 times higher than at 30 years ago. And many more countries, also developing countries, are investing in science and technology. So what does that mean? It means that science is at the cross at the beginning, at the middle of really a lot of different actors. There are scientists and producers of science and technology, but there are also the stakeholders in societies that can be companies, private industries, institutions, countries, and many other actors in the society, but there are also citizens. This is very important. The single citizen that is paying taxes, and with these taxes, some of the science is financed, and there are also groups of citizens that have specific interests that can be for social rights, religious interests, and whatever you think about it, and of course institutions. So nations, union of countries, for example, the European Union, and so on and so forth. And this is very complicated, and all these actors need to communicate with the other. Otherwise, it's the total chaos. And the democratic societies cannot survive without the interactions and the communications between all these actors. And we have to find a common language to talk to each other. This is a sort of sentence that it's quite provocative, but it's quite true that science, for these reasons, is too important to be left only to scientists, for the reasons that we will go through during this webinar. And that's why science communication is no more optional for scientists, but a true necessity. But you have to learn how to properly communicate with the people that are outside your lab, outside your scientific community. Which are the main differences between communicating between scientists, between experts, and with other part of the societies? This requires a really change of your mind, of your point of view. It's not easy, especially at the beginning. I am a scientist, you know. I am a biologist. I did a PhD. I've been a researcher for almost 10 years. And now I am a science communicator. So I know that it's very difficult. It is not as easy as you can think to change your mind, communicating with their peers and communicating with other people. For example, when you communicate outside your lab, you don't just have one audience. So other experts that are talking the same language, but many different audiences with different levels of knowledge, interest, age. Basically, if you talk to a kid in the primary school, it's not like talking to a teenager or an adult, for example. So this is the first peculiarity. There is a knowledge gap between the speaker, you, and the audience. There is an asymmetry. While when you're talking to peers, peers means that you are at the same level. So there is a symmetry. There is a linguistic gap. This is very important. Science has a univocal and aseptic language, unambiguous, functional to the revealing universal concept. This is very important. Thanks to science, we can communicate one with the other, regardless of the origin, our cultural background, our religion, our politics point of view, because science has a unique and unambiguous language. When we read a paper, we read a paper, no matter who wrote it, if it is written in a good science. Otherwise, when we talk normally, when we are talking not between experts, and we'll see in the next slide, words can have different shadows of meaning. This is just a very quick example of the differences between a word used in a scientific way and in a common sense way, for example. Common communications, but you can. I mean, when you talk with your friends of any subject that is not science, you are using common communication. So it's also your experience. You use polysignificant words. Every message can have shades of significance, and also this is very important, emotional content. When you communicate science with common people, you need to be able to communicate risk and uncertainty, because science is often, I would say always, about probabilities. Let's think about survival and disease when you talk about the rate of survival from a cancer, for example. But people need certainties. We all need certainties, because uncertainty is very scaring. So it's not just about translating science. Communications is not just translating science. So this is, again, it's the pictures that compares the communications between peers, between scientists and with the public. It's completely different and opposite point of view, because when you write a paper or when you give a specific specialistic talk, you start from the background and you describe a lot of background, so all the state of art. Then you go with all the supporting details and you describe your experiments, you write your hypothesizing, etc. At the end, you arrive at just one very little, very important, but very little result or conclusions. When you talk to other people, you just do the other way around. So people want immediately needs to know the bottom line, so the result. And then they ask, and so what? So how did you get there? Why is this so important? I don't want to know all the experimental details. I'm not a scientist. I trust you, but you have to tell me something more. You have to tell me a story. And now we will go into this part. This is a sentence that I would like to read you by Telmo Pievani. Is a very famous Italian philosopher of science and evolution, expert of human evolution. And she's also a very expert science communicator. Talking about science is an act of great humility and a deep intelligence. Changing language doesn't mean to snub your public because he or she cannot understand, but is an act that requires a great effort for the scientist. The researcher has to use a new linguistic codes, fishing them from other fields to make sure everyone understands without losing the real meaning. So this is your challenge when you talk to other people that are not experts. And that's where storytelling can help us. I would like to read some extract from this very interesting paper published on some years ago on the Journal of Science Communication. And it's about storytelling, the soul of science communications. So in the first paragraph is more or less what I told you at the beginning. So we are in a society where only science and technology will give us, if well used, will give us the answers to secure a fair and sustainable future with all the challenges that you are facing as a humanity. But it's very important that common people, all the society, become empowered to make informed decisions about issues rooted in science. To achieve these, science communicators must make science-related information engaging and relevant. In short, it is about making people care. That is why we need to go beyond only presenting facts and evidence towards creating emotional connections between scientists and publics. So this is a key word. So it's obvious. It's that the starting point is a correct scientific message, the fact. We cannot betray the scientific message, but it is not enough. The keyword is emotional connections with other people, which is something that when we communicate science to peers, we do not take into account and in consideration. We are not asked to do it. And sometimes it can even be not the case to use. You have to be very accepting. This is the opposite. So, which is the best way to create these emotional connections? Stories. Stories have been used to pass down wisdom, knowledge, and culture, and to strengthen social bonds since the earliest times of humankind's existence. All the cultures in every time in history have stories, and it's part of their culture. Our lineage advanced, our lineage as human beings advanced because we could communicate in abstract terms about the world in which we lived. Stories, how they are constructed, and this is how we should construct our communication when talking to other people about our scientific topic. Typical a beginning, a middle, and an end. The so-called narrative arc. Another key characteristic of a story is that at the end, the plot is resolved and something changes. Is what I was telling you at the beginning. We need a plot twist. So you discovered a protein that may be involved in cancer progressions. Wow. So this is the plot twist. And then you give the meaning to this without, this is maybe something that you could ask me, without making overpromise. And this is very, very difficult to achieve because stories can also have this dark side. But it's you cannot communicate science without stories. It is through understanding the reasons for this change that stories impart meaning and can change the way people see the world. Every one of you will have a story in his heart or mind, a book, something that he read or heard or saw when he was maybe also a kid, that changed his mind and helped to create the people that now you are. So stories can become versatile tools to help people make sense of the world around them, including issues and development rooted in science that are very difficult. Moreover, when people identify with the characters in a story, for example, the scientist that has done a very important discoveries, and when the views and the values of the story characters resonate with their own, stories help them to make informed decisions about their issues in their own life. Let's think about the pandemia, the SARS-CoV-2 pandemia. All the people in the world had to make decisions about being vaccinated or not, about using DPIs to protect themselves. We've been locked down for months. And so we had to understand the meaning of all these things. So storytelling, the soul of communication. In short, all that I have told you is who? Science is made by people. So when you talk about science, who is the main character of your stories? Who did these discoveries and why? Which are the also the human implications of the discovery? What is your story about? And this is exactly the science topic that you want to communicate. Why your objectives? Why are you communicating? To help people understand how a vaccine works, for example. How? You can also describe the methodologies that you use. But keep in mind that, for example, again, with the pandemic example, many scientists, many science communicators explain the PCR technique to trace the presence of the virus in the what's the word in English, in the analysis of your nose, to see if you had if you were positive for the virus. So you can explain the technique, but do not give too many technical details, because this is not important. It's more important to make people informed about the technique and why it's important to do this thing, and what is the result. When and where, give a spatial and temporal context. In short, tell a story. Yeah, metaphors are really, really important and can really help you to communicate science to a non-expert audience. Also, in the previous presentations, you learned that concepts are, especially scientific concepts, are much easier to understand with images. Visual images, or also written or oral metaphors, but metaphors means to represent something with something else, which is more comprehensible. This is a picture from a very popular, at least here in Italy and in other European countries. It's a very popular animated series. It's very old. I used to watch it when I was a kid at the end of the 80s, but they are still broadcasting it again. It's about how the human body works. You can see these space shuttles are lymphocyte B, then these very red things are erythrocytes, there are macrophages, and so on and so forth. And it was a very, very powerful way, and very correct from a scientific point of view, to tell a story about the human body. So but the metaphor must not betray your scientific message. So use the right metaphor, be careful, handle with care. For example, good metaphors are DNA can be described as a manual of instruction. Telomeres can be described, for example, as the end of shoelaces that are protecting the chromosomes. Tumor, in a sort of way, can be described as an anarchic society. For example, you cannot describe atoms as a solar system, because this was used to it's a very ancient model of the atom, which is no more correct from a scientific point of view. So be careful with your metaphor. And this is also very important to know that, again, it's not just a matter of knowledge nor of science when you are telling a story, because the same content, the same scientific result can be received, communicated and received by your public in a completely different way according to the frame. What is a frame? I will describe. Here is the same very famous picture by Vincent van Gogh. It's called The Starry Night. Very famous picture. And it is very different, the impression that you have if you put a modern or an ancient frame. So the same content, The Starry Night, has a different impression, and also at the end the message can be in part different if you communicate in different frame. And that's the same thing when you communicate science. Which are frames? Both the communicators, so you that are communicating, and the people that are listening to you have cognitive frame or frameworks that are part of our brain and that are used to build and organize knowledge, starting from our previous experience, from our personal life, from our culture, from our expectations, from our values, from the countries where we live, for example, or the experience that we had in life, and can have an unavoidable process of interpretation of reality and also of science. You have to be aware of this when you talk about science, because sometimes scientists are surprised when they are not completely when people maybe understand something different, and they ask, but how is this possible that they didn't understand exactly what I wanted to say? Maybe they understood also the science, but maybe they are receiving the information in a different way, because everyone is different. Social rules, exactly, personal cultures and values, everything are an essential part of our personal cultural identity. And the frames can also be something personal, but can also be something cultural and of the whole society, and they are very difficult to change. I wanted to give you an examples. The history of radium. So changing the frame when you are communicating can be very hard. And I will tell you the history of radium. You all know the radium. It was discovered at the beginning of the previous centuries by the Curies. They discovered the radium and radioactivities, and it became very famous also because it was the first Nobel Prize to a woman in the history of the humanity. And it opened up the first 20, 30 years of the 20th centuries were the golden age for the atomic physics. And the radium, the radioactivity was, from the cultural point of view, was seen as something very positive, luminescent. It emits energy. It's something also like magical, associated with light, with power, with something really, really positive. And so there were energy drinks with the so-called soda atomique. It's in French. It means the atomic soda. Inside this beverage, there was a radioactive radium. There were also a sort of solutions, the drinking solution that you could buy in pharmacy, and yes, to stay better, containing radium. There were also, this is an Italian advertisement. It was a radioactive soap to clean your skin. La crema, a cream to be put on your face to have your skin soft and smooth. This was toothpaste to brush your teeth, and also the wool for the baby clothes, containing radioactive radium. It can, for us, it's incomprehensible, but also for scientists, because at the beginning of the 20s, there was the case of the radium girls. The radium girls were some workers, women workers that were working for a the US Radium Corporation, a factory producing watches and clocks with the numbers painted with oh my god, the word, the color to paint the numbers was containing radium, so in the night it could glow and you could read the hour in the night. These girls used to lick the instrument to color the numbers with their lips and tongue, and so they were eating a lot of radium, and they start to feel badly, to have very severe problems to teeth and bones, and they were also dying. So the doctors and the scientists starting to tell the society, maybe this radium is not so good as we were thinking, so be careful, it could also be harmful. But nothing changed for almost other 20 years. The only things that made the changing of the frame was the atomic bomb. So the release of the atomic bomb by the Americans on the two Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during the Second World War was the so dramatic event that it was a wake-up call for the world that maybe radioactivity could also be very, very powerful, but also harmful. And so the frame changed. But it took how many time and how many victims? So this is what was just to tell you that science communication is a very complex thing, because it's not just something that has to do with the scientific data. Other examples of modern frames that you have to take into account when communicating, because the other people can be influenced by these frames. For example, the hero against the system. This is the anti-vax ex-doctor, English doctor, Andrew Wakefield. He was famous because he published a paper that he was then retracted many years later by Lancet, claiming that the vaccinations against the MPR vaccinations in kids was causing autism. And he's seen as a hero that is fighting the system, the pharmaceutical companies, the government that are very bad and wants to control all the people, while there are some heroes that are fighting the system. This is a very good stories, for example. So this is why it's so common. The opposition between tradition and innovation. This is opponents to GMOs in Italy. Natural versus artificial. Natural is also seen as something always good and artificial always bad. Humankind is the cancer for the planet, and I mean, maybe there can be something true, but it's not black or white, of course. The good ones, common people, again, are threatened by villains, scientists, big pharma, and whatever you want, and all the conspirational theories again. And do not forget, when you are communicating, again, this word, emotions. Antonio Damaso is a very famous neuropsychologist, and one of his famous quotes is, we humans, we are not thinking machines that feel, but we are feeling machines that think. So emotions is the first reaction, the first reaction of when you think about, when you hear something also about science, is emotional. Then you have rationality. which is a very it's a slow process. It comes later, and it's also more difficult and more time and energy consuming. But we have to keep it in mind again when we are communicating science. So why fake news are so popular? Because they're very powerful and good stories. And stories are the best way for us to look at reality, to make sense of the world. Just a very an example. The coronavirus pandemic, this is a very, it was a very common and popular fake news. The coronavirus pandemic is a cover for a plan to implant trackable microchips, and that the Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates is behind it. But we know and will refuse vaccine, so to stay free. In these six rows of text, we have the perfect ingredients for a TV series, for a movie, for a book, for whatever you like. There is a threat for humankind, the microchip, a mean, a vaccine, a villain, which is powerful and rich in oppositions with common people, Bill Gates. There are the heroes, a small group of people who is not fooled by the system, and the call of action, a call to action, fight. So these, again, are the perfect ingredients of the stories. I'm not telling you to communicate science as a fake news, of course, because fake news do not have to respect the scientific correctness, because they are fake news. And it's even more difficult to do good and effective science communication, because you have to build up a good stories, emotional stories, without betraying the scientific message, with being able to convey complexity of science. Because, for example, often fake news are too simple, and that's why people believe in them, because they are simpler explanation of reality, and they are more safe than reality, which is maybe more complex and more uncertain. So in this, the second part of the webinar, very shortly, some practical tips. The goals and the challenges, understanding who are you talking to, and be aware of all what we're talking about. The challenge, as I told you before, is to be able to transfer the scientific context, or the ones that matters, with different words, clear and correct. The ones that matters. When you talk about your research project, to not to an expert, not to your PhD supervisor, for example, it's not necessary to give all the details of all the experiments, of all the micro variations that you observed, because you will lose your audience after 1 minute, because they cannot follow you, because there is this asymmetry between you and us. It's obvious and it's normal. So focus on the real important things to convey. So also enjoyment and interest. You have to be catchy and try to stimulate an effective response. Again, the emotions. Use the power of the emotion for an effective reception for the informations. Always make clear, why should they care? What should they stay and listen to you? You love your subject, you are a scientist, you choose to do science, but the other people, no, they didn't. Because why? They always keep in mind, there is a good reason why these people must stay here to listen to me and to my science, other than going out for an ice cream or going to watch a movie. Always, when you prepare, always prepare yourself. When you have to meet the people or to write an article to non-experts, for example. Always keep in mind, when you are preparing your speech, presentation, event, your audience. Are you talking to 11 years old kids, or to senior workers, I don't know, Keep it in mind also where you are in the event. Adapt your language and concept to your audience. And this is very difficult because you can also have an audience which is heterogeneous for age and interest. You will always often have these situations. So the golden rule is try to put yourself in the shoes of the smallest, the youngest, or the ones that you think that knows less, because if he or she can understand, all the other people will understand. Check out the reactions, look at the eyes of your audience. If you are in presence, it's better, and adjust the tone, rhythm, and language accordingly. You will learn a lot looking at your audience, the non-verbal communications of the body. Try to be simple and clear, which being simple doesn't mean doing a bad communications. Simple and of course correct. Careful with technical words. Use very few and always explain them. Keep in mind your audience. Words that you use commonly speaking with your lab mate at the coffee machine may not have a meaning at all for people that are outside your lab. Be honest and also keep this in mind. The myth of absolute truth and objectiveness. The content of science, so your data, the fact that your protein is phosphorylated by an enzyme, can be objective, even if some philosopher of science could object. But your communication cannot be objective, because it's conveyed by humans, by you. You are human, and you have your frames, your emotions, blah, blah, blah. And the other people is a human. And the more you are involved into a certain topic, the hardest is to be totally objective. But it's okay. The important thing is to be aware of this. And do not deny or do not minimize the so-called dark side of the forces of science that can be, as in the example of the atomic bomb, radioactive energy can be very useful, but also very harmful for humankind. And there are also other subjects that are not only a matter of science, but also ethics. For example, animal testing. I heard once an animal activist that she was arguing with the scientists, saying that animal testing was implying that humans are more important than other species, and the scientist was saying, no, it's not true, it's not true. But she was right. If we accept the fact that we can use animals to test for medicines for humans and for also other animals, we are implying that we consider the human species something that is better than the others. We don't have alternatives. The world will be maybe a saddest place without all the medicines that we could develop with animal testing, but do not deny this ethical, crucial problem. So accepting animal testing is a specific approach that we cannot deny, but we have to include in our communication and use it to discuss with other people, without, of course, always keeping in mind that at the moment we need animal testing in a certain phase of medical research, for example. Knowing less doesn't mean not to understand. Remember that you have, in the vast majority of cases, people that don't understand maybe all the science. You are explaining, you are telling them this, but they can understand, they're not stupid. And some scientists think that common people do not understand or do not agree with some scientific practice only because they are stupid. This is a completely wrong approach. To sum up, communicate science, research results, and establish a dialogue with the society is an essential requirement for research. Communicating science is difficult. It requires a change in mindset and language. Theory is important, but practice is even more important. The only way to learn is to practice, and again practice. Oh, sorry. And remember that science communications is very often more a matter of non-scientific components. Of course, the message, the scientific message must be correct. These are also other just clues to remember. And this is the final word, very important, trust. You have to build trust. Building trust is between scientists, the scientific community and the society is very important. It's a long process. Trust cannot be built in 1 month or 1 day or during emergency, for example, a pandemic, but should be built day by day by a dialogue between science community and all the stakeholders in the society. And this is the golden rule by Carl Sagan, a very famous astrophysics and science communicator, American science communicator. People are not stupid. They believe things for reasons. The last way for skeptics or scientists to get the attentions of bright, curious, intelligent people is to belittle or condescend or to show arrogance towards their beliefs. So do not, this is maybe one very common danger that some scientists can go into it when communicating science. Don't show arrogance with other people's beliefs, because they can have very important personal reasons. And I thank you for the attentions. The timing is okay. I stop the sharing, and if there are questions, I will be glad to answer.
Thank you so much, Chiara, for the great insights. At least I had a lot of takes away actually from the talk. It's really interesting. We can open the floor for questions on the chat for the audience. In the meanwhile, while they're writing or maybe thinking of questions, actually I have a couple of questions. I will start with the general idea about storytelling in science. Do you think it's suitable for all types of science? So I believe in the audience, for example, we have people in engineering fields and basic fundamental science and even social and psychological science, for example. So the question is it suitable for all types of science?
Yes, but I must be honest, and there are some technical, some areas of science that are more difficult to communicate than others, because they are counterintuitive. For example, astrophysics or the physics of particles, it's very hard because it's really, really, really complicated. It goes against the common sense. Even I am a biologist, and when I hear people talking about the bosons and atoms and whatever it is, it's really complicated. I think that it's more complicated to do storytellings with certain topics than, for example, for the how the immune system works, because metaphors in this area of science are easier. So my answer is yes. There is nothing that cannot be transformed into a good stories, but of course some very technical aspect of science can be more difficult, and in this case maybe you can try to talk also about the people, the history, for example, of that discovery, how we got to discover the boson, why it's so important. And then you can try to, in this storytelling, you can try to put some scientific details during your stories.
Great. And I have a following point on that. So do you think that based on your experience, how can we put this in practice? Is it only on researchers to learn how to communicate well and to tell story about their research? Or maybe there's also the idea of having some initiatives, some organizations of experienced people in storytelling, like storytellers, and they can cooperate with scientists and researchers? And which approach, maybe both, I don't know, based on your experience, you can share some thoughts?
Based on my experience, I think that it should be mandatory in any university course when you are studying to become a scientist, to have a course on storytelling, because taking also from the theory of storytelling, which is not only which is from the narrative, from the area of language, from the area of social studies, so very transdisciplinary approach. Also creative, for example, I'm also a writer. I write books for children and young readers, not only science books, so novels and so on. And this for me was a great and I attended also course on creative writing, for example, at storytelling. And this is very helpful also for scientists, because you learn what building a story means and how to use it to tell your science. So you could also open your mind and go outside and sign up for a creative writing course, not scientific writing, novel writing, or whatever it is. This is very helpful for me, also for a scientist.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, I would like to just remind the audience, if they have questions, they can post it on the chat. Here I have a question from a colleague previously been sent. In regards to adaptation of language, you mentioned this under the taking care of your audience. I think this is, at least from my area of working, that, for example, applied engineering, sometimes it's really hard to adapt the language for the audience. So my colleague is asking, any tips for practicing that?
It's the very first advice is to practice, because and look at your audience. So I used to say, if your grandmother is not able to understand what you're telling, so you're not effective, because maybe you're using words that are too technical, but not only words, but concept. You give for known concepts that are not known if you're not an engineer. So it's a very work on yourself that you have to do, and try to remember when you were not an engineer or a student in the engineering university, when you were just a kid, and ask yourself, when I was 14, would I have been able to understand what now I'm telling? If the answer is no, or not at all, or not completely, so there's something that is not going on correctly. So it's not only a matter of single words, but also from what I'm telling you, you can understand because have you know the knowledge to understand it, or there are something that I have to explain you before. So it's a very sort of in a sense psychological work on yourself that you have to do. It's difficult. The practice is the answer. Practicing.
Great. Thanks. Okay, one last call for questions in the chat, if there are any. Yeah, we have wonderful presentation. Thanks. Okay. All right. I thank you so much. We have something. Yeah, maybe I can read it loud. As researchers, we are used to the uncertainty that is linked to science, but I think this is the most difficult concept to explain to the general public that wants straight yes or no answers. So how can we translate this uncertainty for the general public?
This is a big challenge, and the first thing is that Also, the scientific community in his whole numbers of scientists sometimes has given an idea of science as a magical wand that can be, I mean, giving certainties. So the first step is, as a new generation of scientists, keep this in mind. It's very difficult to communicate uncertainties, because think about an example. Think about, we all know that from breast cancers, in the 90% of cases, you are still alive after 5 years, because we have a lot of drugs and therapies. This is the global, I mean, the number, the statistic. But when you doctor, you biologist, you sit in front of a patient, of a woman, for that single woman, it is not 90%, it is or 100% or 0%, because she will be alive or dead after 5 years. You can't live at 90%. So this is, again, dealing with uncertainties and statistics. It's very difficult for this. There is not a magic wand. We have to be aware of this, and we have to be able, in our stories, to make people aware that science is not perfect, that there is a part of uncertainties that we cannot handle, that we have to accept as a part of the natural world of our lives, and but science is the best way, maybe, that we have to deal with uncertainties. So we cannot remove it because it's part of the world, but with science we can try to handle it and manage it, and that we are doing the best that we can do at the moment. So maybe this can be a tip to communicate uncertainties.
Great. One more question, maybe, or so, if there are some. Yeah, there's a question from Amani. Thanks for the presentation. Can we use storytelling to emphasize a hypothesis in research?
Why not? Yes, I think you can. The dark side of storytelling is not, I mean, not to lose the point, because the risk is to overpromise, to make overpromises. For example, in the medical field, which is my field, that's why I'm always referring to it. Storytelling is very important, but be very careful when you, for example, talk about a new discovery for cancer treatment, because many people that will listen to you maybe are cancer patients. So, okay, storytelling, but do not emphasize too much, ending up in overpromise or saying things that are not that cannot be the truth in a short time. But why not? Storytelling, if you use it well, storytelling, it's really a tool that you can use in every areas of your communication.
Interesting. Yeah, do we still have further questions? I think we are good in the time. Yeah, we have one more from Hassanul. Is science communication one of the reasons to conspiracy theories, because the scientific community was not able to explain the probability of vaccines efficiency, for example?
This is a very to answer to this question, I will need 1 hour. But the problem with the communication during the pandemic, at least in Italy, and I don't know if it was the same in other countries, is that many scientists that talk on the TV, on the public arena, were not good science communicators, because they thought that the only fact that they were scientists and they knew how a vaccine works was enough to explain to people the importance and to put all these emotional fear and shock that all the people were feeling at the moment. because, as I told at the end of the talk, you do not build a trust and a dialogue between science and society during an emergency. You should start in peace, not in war. But fake news will always be there, because they will always be the best stories that we can think about, because they do not have to be reliable. They can betray the scientific man. Who cares about the science? If it is a good story, it works. That is a fake news. So, and then it's emotional. Fake news are built to touch you in your emotional part of your brain, and emotions are faster than rationality. So we have always to know that these fake news will always exist. But if you do a good science communications, we can counteract them.
Okay. And there's another question. Do you think that the PhD training must include training on storytelling?
For me, yes, but not it's good during a PhD training, but in my opinion, in the step before, so during your university or master course before doing a PhD, but it's good also during a PhD course, of course.
Great. More questions from the audience? I think the questions get more and more interesting with the time.
Maybe it takes some time to write all the questions.
Yes.
I'm sorry for my pronunciations, because I used to talk in English a lot when I was in the lab 10 years ago. Now I work as a science communicator in Italy, and of course I talk in Italian all the time, because the linguistic barrier in Italy. So I'm not at all used anymore at speaking English. I read in English, I watch movies, but I do not talk in English quite often.
At least I think from the reaction of the audience and myself, it went really well. It is really good. Yeah. Okay, so it seems that no more questions from the audience. I believe it has been a lot of insights, a lot of takeaways from today's webinar. Thank you so much, Chiara, for being with us.
It was a pleasure.
Very, very appreciated to be here in the webinar. And maybe we can have you in other events or occasions, of course, in the Marie Curie, either webinar or Marie Curie events. I think the science and communication really important topic, especially in the MCAA. We have a lot of events. We care about the idea. So it's great again to have you. Again, thank you. And I would like also to thank the audience for being with us in the webinar for the late afternoon or the Friday. For me, it was a great way to wrap up the week. And I wish everyone a nice weekend. Thank you so much.
Good luck with all your careers.
Thank you so much. Bye.